It was a quiet night in a small town where nothing ever seemed to go wrong. The streets were calm, the houses were close together, and everyone knew each other by name. People left their doors unlocked, children played outside until late, and there was a strong sense of safety that made the town feel almost untouched by danger. But on one cold evening in the late 1980s, that feeling was suddenly broken. Something happened that would leave the town in fear and confusion for many years to come. The victim was a young woman named Sarah. She was known by almost everyone in the town. She worked at a local store, always smiling and greeting customers with kindness. Her life was simple, and she had dreams of moving to a bigger city someday. That night, she had finished her shift later than usual. Some coworkers remembered seeing her leave alone, waving goodbye as she walked into the dimly lit parking lot. No one thought anything was wrong at the time. It was just another normal night, or so it seemed. The next morning, everything changed. Sarah did not show up for work, which was very unusual for her. At first, people thought she might be sick or running late. But as the hours passed, worry began to grow. Her family tried calling her, but there was no answer. By afternoon, the police were informed, and a search began. Neighbors joined in, walking through nearby areas, calling her name, hoping she would respond. But there was only silence. Later that day, the search took a darker turn. A passerby discovered something near a quiet road just outside town. It was a scene that no one expected to find in such a peaceful place. The police quickly arrived and secured the area. News spread fast, and fear began to rise among the residents. People locked their doors that night, something many had never done before. The town that once felt safe now felt uncertain and dangerous. Investigators worked quickly, trying to understand what had happened. They looked at the scene carefully, collecting anything that might help them find answers. There were signs that suggested a struggle, but there were no clear witnesses. No one had seen anything unusual, no loud noises, no signs of trouble. It was as if the crime had happened in complete silence, leaving behind only questions. The police began talking to people who knew Sarah, friends, co-workers, neighbors, anyone who might have seen her or spoken to her that night. Some remembered small details, like the time she left work or the direction she walked, but nothing pointed to a clear suspect. Every lead seemed to end in confusion. The more they searched, the more it felt like the truth was just out of reach. As days turned into weeks, the investigation grew more difficult. The town was filled with rumors. Some people believed it was someone from outside, a stranger passing through. Others feared it might be someone from within the community. Trust began to break down as suspicion quietly spread. People started looking at each other differently, unsure of who they could trust. The police continued their work, but progress was slow. They collected evidence from the scene, storing it carefully, hoping that one day it might help solve the case. At the time, technology was limited. There were tools available, but nothing advanced enough to give clear answers from the small pieces of evidence they had. It felt like they were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Months passed, and the case began to lose attention. New events took over the news, and the town slowly tried to return to normal. But for Sarah's family, nothing was normal anymore. They were left with pain, questions, and no answers. They kept hoping that someone somewhere would come forward with information that could help. The investigators did not give up easily, but without new leads, the case began to slow down. Files were organized, reports were written, and evidence was stored away. It became what many feared, a cold case. Something that once felt urgent and active slowly faded into the background. Even so, there was always a feeling that the truth was still there, hidden somewhere in the details that had been collected. Something had been missed, something small but important. And while the town tried to move on, the story of that night remained unfinished, waiting quietly for the moment when someone, or something, would finally bring it back to life. As the years slowly passed, the memory of that terrible night began to fade for many people in the town. Life moved on. just as it always does. New families moved in, children grew older, and the streets slowly returned to their quiet routines. The shops reopened each morning, neighbors greeted each other again, and the feeling of fear that once filled the air became less visible. But even though things looked normal on the outside, the story of Sarah was never truly forgotten. For Sarah's family, time did not heal everything. Each year that passed without answers felt heavier than the last. They kept her memory alive in small ways, through photographs, through stories, and through quiet moments of hope that one day the truth would be revealed. Birthdays and holidays were the hardest. These were the moments when her absence was felt the most. They often wondered what her life would have been like if that night had never happened. The police department also changed over time. New officers joined, and older ones retired. The original investigators who worked on Sarah's case slowly moved on to other duties or left the force completely. The case files were stored in a quiet room filled with other unsolved cases, each one carrying its own story of mystery and loss. Occasionally, a new detective would open the file, read through the reports, and try to see something that others might have missed. But each time, they faced the same problem. There was simply not enough evidence to move forward. The evidence collected from the crime scene was carefully kept, sealed and stored away. At the time, it did not seem like much. There were small items, samples, and notes taken during the early days of the investigation. Back then, these pieces did not provide clear answers, but they were never thrown away. Some investigators believed that even the smallest detail could become important in the future, even if it did not make sense at the time. As the years went by, the case became what many people called a cold case. This meant that there were no new leads, no active suspects, and no clear direction for the investigation. It was a painful label, especially for those who still cared deeply about finding the truth. To the outside world, it seemed like the case had been left behind. But in reality, it was simply waiting for something new to bring it back to life. In the town, people rarely spoke about the case openly anymore. It became one of those stories that everyone knew but no one wanted to discuss. Parents would sometimes mention it quietly to their children, not to scare them, but to remind them to be careful. Older residents still remembered the fear that followed the crime, while younger ones only knew it as a story from the past. There were moments when hope returned, even if only briefly. Sometimes the police received tips from people claiming to have information. These tips were always taken seriously. Investigators would follow them, asking questions and checking details. But most of the time, these leads led nowhere. Some were based on rumors, others on misunderstandings. Each time a lead failed, it added to the growing frustration. Technology was slowly changing during these years. New methods of solving crimes were being developed in different parts of the world. There were stories on the news about old cases being solved after many years. These stories gave Sarah's family a small sense of hope. They began to wonder if the same thing could happen in their case. Could there be something hidden in the evidence that no one had been able to see before? Despite these advancements, the case remained untouched for a long time. There were limited resources, and newer cases often took priority. Police departments had to focus on current threats, and older cases were sometimes left waiting due to lack of time and tools. It was not because they did not care, but because they simply did not have what they needed to move forward. Still, the evidence stayed safe, preserved in its original condition. It was like a time capsule, holding pieces of the past that had not yet been fully understood. Some detectives believed that one day, the right technology or the right person would come along and see things differently. They believed that the truth was still there, hidden in those carefully stored items. For Sarah's family, hope never fully disappeared. Even after many years, they continued to ask questions, to push for answers, and to believe that justice would come someday. They refused to accept that the case would remain unsolved forever. Deep down, they felt that the story was not over. And while the world outside continued to change, bringing new ideas and new possibilities, something important was slowly taking shape. something that would soon give investigators a chance to look at the old evidence in a completely new way, opening a door that had been closed for decades. Many years had passed since the night Sarah disappeared, and the world was no longer the same. Technology had grown in ways that people in the 1980s could not have imagined. Computers became faster, tools became smarter, and new methods of solving problems were discovered. In the field of crime investigation, one of the biggest changes came from something very small: DNA. DNA is a part of every human body. It carries information that makes each person unique. Even though people may look similar, their DNA is different. Scientists learned that this tiny detail could be used to identify individuals with great accuracy. Over time, this discovery began to change how police solved crimes. What once seemed impossible was now becoming possible. At first, DNA testing was slow and expensive. Not every police department had access to it, and many older cases were never tested because the technology did not exist at the time. But as the years went by, DNA testing became more advanced. It became faster, more reliable, and more widely available. Investigators began to look back at old cases, wondering if the answers had been there all along, hidden in the evidence they had already collected. This idea slowly reached the police department in Sarah's town. New detectives, who had not been part of the original investigation, began reviewing cold cases with fresh eyes. They were trained in modern techniques and understood how powerful DNA evidence could be. When they opened Sarah's case file, they saw something that others had seen many times before, but this time, they looked at it differently. They noticed that some of the evidence collected years ago had never been tested using modern DNA methods. Back then, it had been stored carefully, but could not be fully analyzed. Now, things were different. The technology had improved so much that even very small samples could provide useful information. This gave the investigators a new sense of hope. The decision was made to reopen the case. It was not an easy process. The evidence had to be carefully taken out of storage, making sure nothing was damaged or contaminated. Each item was handled with great care, just as it had been many years ago. The investigators worked closely with forensic experts, people trained to study and analyze evidence using scientific methods. These experts knew that even the smallest mistake could affect the results. As the testing began, there was a quiet feeling of anticipation. Everyone involved understood how important this was. For Sarah's family, this was the moment they had been waiting for, even though they did not yet know it. For the investigators, it was a chance to solve a mystery that had remained unanswered for decades. Days turned into weeks as the scientists worked in the lab. They carefully examined the evidence, looking for traces of DNA that might have been left behind at the scene. It was a slow and detailed process. Sometimes, the results were unclear and they had to start again. But they did not give up. Finally, something began to appear. From one of the samples, the scientists were able to extract a DNA profile. This was a pattern, like a unique code, that could belong to a specific person. It was the kind of evidence that investigators had hoped for, but never expected to find after so many years. The room was filled with a quiet excitement. This was the first real breakthrough in the case. But finding a DNA profile was only the beginning. The next step was to compare this profile to existing records. Over the years, many countries had built large DNA databases containing information from known individuals. These databases were used to match DNA from crime scenes with possible suspects. If there was a match, it could lead investigators directly to the person responsible. The investigators submitted the DNA profile into the system and waited. It was a tense moment. Everyone knew that this could change everything. If there was no match, the case might remain unsolved. But if there was a match, it could finally bring answers after all these years. At first, there was no direct match. This was disappointing, but it did not mean the end. New methods had been developed that allowed investigators to do more than just direct comparisons. They could now look for partial matches, connections between the DNA profile and relatives of possible suspects. This method, often called genetic tracing, opened a completely new path. Using this approach, investigators began to search for families connected to the DNA profile. It was like building a puzzle, piece by piece, using information that had never been available before. Slowly, a picture began to form. It pointed toward a specific family line, one that had never been considered in the original investigation. The detectives followed this new lead carefully. They gathered information, checked records, and started to focus on individuals who could be connected to the case. For the first time in decades, the investigation was moving forward in a real and meaningful way. There was still a long way to go, and nothing was certain yet, but something had changed. The case was no longer silent. It was active again, full of new energy and possibility. The truth, which had been hidden for so long, was beginning to come closer. And as the investigators followed this new path, they could feel that they were getting closer to someone who had lived all these years without being caught, unaware that the smallest trace left behind on that night would one day return to reveal everything. The new DNA lead changed everything. What had once been a silent and forgotten case was now active again, filled with movement and purpose. The investigators knew they had something important, but they also understood that they had to be careful. A single mistake could ruin years of work. So they moved slowly, checking every detail, making sure each step was correct. The DNA profile had led them to a possible family connection. It was not a direct match, but it pointed to relatives of the unknown person. Using this information, the investigators began building a family tree. They looked at records such as birth certificates, old addresses, and public documents. It was like tracing a path through time, trying to find the one person who could be connected to the crime. This process took weeks. Sometimes the trail became confusing, with many names and connections that did not seem clear at first. But the detectives stayed focused. They worked together, sharing ideas and checking each other's work. Slowly, they began to narrow down the list of possible individuals. One name started to stand out. It was a man who had lived in or near the town many years ago. At the time of the crime, he had been around the same area where Sarah was last seen. His name had never come up during the original investigation. He had not been considered a suspect, and no one had reported anything unusual about him. To most people, he had lived a normal life. The investigators began to look deeper into his past. They checked his history, his movements, and any possible connections to Sarah. There were small details that began to raise questions. He had lived close enough to know the area well. He had no strong alibi for the night of the crime. And most importantly, his age and background matched the profile suggested by the DNA evidence, but they still needed proof. The detectives knew they could not make an arrest based only on suspicion. They needed to confirm that his DNA matched the sample from the crime scene. To do this, they had to collect a new sample from him. This had to be done carefully and legally, without raising too much attention. They began to watch him quietly. By now, many years had passed, and the man was older. He lived a quiet life, and to anyone looking from the outside, there was nothing unusual about him. He had neighbors, routines, and a normal daily schedule. But the investigators saw something different. To them, he was a possible answer to a question that had remained unsolved for decades. They followed him for days, observing his movements. They waited for the right moment to collect something he had touched or used, something that could contain his DNA. This method had been used before in other cases. It allowed investigators to gather evidence without direct confrontation. One day, the opportunity came. The man had been at a public place and left behind an item he had used. The investigators moved quickly but carefully. They collected the item and sent it to the lab for testing. Now, all they could do was wait. The waiting was difficult. Everyone involved knew how important this moment was. If the DNA matched, it would confirm everything. If it did not, they would have to go back and search again. The pressure was high, but no one said much. They simply waited for the results. Finally, the call came from the lab. The DNA from the collected sample matched the DNA found at the crime scene. There was a moment of silence as the news settled in. After all these years, they had finally found a connection. The person they had been searching for was no longer unknown. He had a name, a face, and a life that had gone on for decades without anyone knowing the truth. The investigators acted quickly. They gathered all the evidence, prepared the necessary documents, and moved forward with the arrest. Police officers arrived at the man's home. To him, it was just another normal day, until it suddenly changed. He was taken into custody, confused but quiet. And for the first time, he was being directly connected to the crime that had happened so many years ago. News of the arrest spread quickly through the town. People were shocked. Many could not believe it. Some remembered the man from years ago, while others had never heard his name before. The idea that someone had lived among them, carrying such a secret for so long, was difficult to understand. It brought back memories of the past, of the fear and confusion that had once filled the town. For Sarah's family, the news was overwhelming. After years of waiting, hoping, and wondering, there was finally a real answer. The person responsible had been found. But along with that answer came many emotions: relief, sadness, and even anger. So much time had passed, and yet the pain of loss still remained. The investigation was not over yet. The arrest was only the beginning of the next step. The detectives still needed to build a full case, to understand exactly what had happened on that night, and to prepare for what would come next. Questions still remained, and the truth, though closer than ever, was not yet fully known. And as the man sat in custody and the investigators prepared for what lay ahead, one thing became clear. The story that had been silent for so long was now finally being heard, and what would come next would reveal everything that had been hidden for decades. After the arrest, everything began to move quickly, but at the same time, it felt slow and heavy. The man who had been taken into custody was now at the center of a case that had waited decades for answers. For the investigators, this was the moment they had worked toward for so long. But they knew that making an arrest was only one part of the journey. Now, they had to prove the truth in a court of law. The man was questioned by the police. At first, he did not say much. He seemed calm, almost distant, as if he had prepared himself for this moment without ever expecting it to come. The investigators asked him about his past, about where he had been on the night Sarah disappeared, and about his connection to the town. Some of his answers were unclear, while others did not fully match the facts that had been collected. When the investigators presented the DNA evidence, the situation changed. This was not something that could be easily explained away. DNA was strong, clear, and very difficult to deny. It placed him at the scene, connecting him directly to the crime. There was a long silence in the room as he listened. For the first time, it seemed like the weight of the situation was beginning to reach him. Over the next few days, more details began to come out. Investigators worked carefully, going back through old records and combining them with the new evidence. They rebuilt the story step by step, trying to understand exactly what had happened that night many years ago. Small details that once seemed unimportant now made sense when placed next to the DNA findings. The case was then taken to court. For Sarah's family, walking into the courtroom was one of the hardest moments of their lives. So many years had passed, yet the pain felt as real as ever. They sat quietly, holding on to each other, waiting to hear the truth that had been hidden for so long. Around them were people from the town, reporters, and others who had followed the story. The room was filled with a quiet tension. The trial began with the presentation of evidence. The prosecutors explained how the case had been reopened and how modern DNA technology had made it possible to find the suspect. They showed how the evidence collected decades ago had been preserved and later tested, leading to the breakthrough. Step by step, they connected the past to the present, building a clear and strong case. The defense tried to challenge the evidence. They questioned how the DNA was collected and whether it could have been contaminated over time. They raised doubts about the long gap between the crime and the arrest. But the forensic experts explained everything in simple and clear terms. They showed how the testing was done carefully, and how the results were reliable. The DNA match was strong, and it pointed clearly to the man on trial. Witnesses were also called to speak. Some were people who had known Sarah, sharing memories of who she was and how her loss had affected them. Others were investigators, both old and new, who explained how the case had been handled over the years. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, helping the court understand the full picture. As the trial continued, the man's behavior began to change. He no longer seemed as calm as before. The evidence against him was strong, and it was becoming harder to deny the truth. Eventually, faced with the reality of the situation, he began to speak more openly. What he revealed was painful to hear. He admitted that he had been there that night. He described how he had seen Sarah and followed her. What started as something small had turned into something much worse. His actions had led to a tragic outcome, one that he had hidden for many years. He had lived his life, keeping the secret buried, believing that he would never be found. The courtroom was silent as he spoke. For Sarah's family, hearing these words was both heartbreaking and relieving. They finally knew what had happened, but the truth brought back all the pain they had carried for so long. Some of them cried quietly, while others simply listened, trying to process everything. In the end, the court reached its decision. The man was found guilty. Justice, though delayed, had finally been served. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime and the years of suffering it had caused. It was a moment that marked the end of a long and painful chapter. For the town, the case brought a mix of emotions. There was relief that the truth had been found, but also sadness for what had been lost. People spoke about Sarah again, remembering her not just as a victim, but as a person who had once been part of their lives. For her family, the journey was not easy, but it brought a sense of closure. The questions that had once filled their minds were finally answered. They could now begin to move forward, carrying her memory with them in a different way. But even as this chapter came to an end, something else became clear. This case was not just about one story. It showed what was possible when old evidence meets new technology. It showed that even after many years, the truth can still be found, and that there were many other cases, still waiting, that might soon follow the same path. After the trial ended, and the courtroom became quiet again, the story of Sarah did not simply disappear. In many ways, it was only beginning a new chapter, one that would reach far beyond the small town where everything had started. What happened in this case became an example, a powerful reminder that even when time passes, the truth can still be found. For the investigators, this case changed how they looked at their work. It showed them that no case is ever truly finished as long as evidence still exists. The detectives who worked on reopening the case felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just to Sarah and her family, but to many others whose cases remained unsolved. They began to review other cold cases with fresh energy, asking the same question again and again. Could DNA reveal the truth here too? Police departments in other places also took notice. Stories about the case spread through news reports and professional circles. Investigators shared what they had learned, explaining how the old evidence had been preserved and how new technology made the breakthrough possible. This helped other departments understand that even cases from many years ago could still hold answers. DNA technology became even more important after this. People began to see it not just as a scientific tool, but as a way to bring justice where it once seemed impossible. Laboratories improved their methods, making tests faster and more accurate. Databases grew larger, allowing more connections to be made between unknown DNA and real people. What once took months could now be done in a much shorter time. There was also a growing effort to protect and store evidence properly. In the past, some cases had lost important details because evidence was not kept in the right conditions. But now, departments understood how valuable even the smallest piece could be. Training improved, and new systems were put in place to make sure that nothing important would be lost again. For Sarah's family, life slowly began to feel different. The pain of losing her never disappeared, But the weight of not knowing was finally lifted. For years, they had lived with questions that had no answers. Now, they had the truth. It did not change what happened, but it gave them a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. They also began to speak about their experience, sharing their story with others. They wanted people to understand how important it is to never give up on seeking justice. They met with other families who were still waiting for answers, offering support and hope. In doing this, they turned their pain into something meaningful, helping others keep going even in difficult times. The town itself was also changed. While many years had passed, the case had left a mark that could not be erased. When the truth finally came out, it reminded everyone of the importance of community and trust. People began to look out for each other more, remembering that safety is something that must be protected. Younger generations, who had only heard the story as something from the past, now understood it in a new way. They saw how science and determination had worked together to solve a mystery that once seemed impossible. It became a story not just about loss, but about persistence and progress. The case also raised important questions about justice and time. Many people wondered how someone could live freely for so many years without being caught. It was a difficult thought, but it also showed the limits of earlier investigations and the importance of continued improvement. It reminded everyone that systems are not perfect, but they can grow stronger over time. In the world of criminal investigation, this case became a symbol of hope. It proved that answers can still be found, even after decades of silence. It encouraged law enforcement agencies to revisit old files, to trust new methods, and to believe that no case is truly beyond solving. At the same time, it brought attention to the role of science in everyday life. DNA, something that exists in every human being, became a key part of justice. It connected the past to the present, showing that even the smallest trace can hold a powerful truth. As time moved forward, more cold cases began to be reopened. Some led to new discoveries, while others still remain unsolved. But the difference now is that there is more hope than before. Each case carries the possibility that one day, the truth will come out. Sarah's story became part of that larger movement. It is remembered not only for the tragedy that occurred, but for the justice that was finally achieved. It stands as a reminder that patience, determination, and new ideas can work together to bring light into even the darkest situations. And while there are still many stories waiting to be told, many families still searching for answers, one thing is now clear. Time may pass, memories may fade, but the truth has a way of waiting quietly until the moment comes when it can finally be seen.